The diner was half awake, the kind of quiet that comes right before sunrise, when the world is still deciding whether to start another day. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, thick with routine and fatigue. Mara Brennan had been working at Rosie's Diner for 6 years, long enough for every scratch on the counter and every flickering bulb to feel like part of her own story. She was refilling cups, wiping down tables, rehearsing her smile for another morning of "How's your day going?" when she heard it. An old man's voice, soft and weary. "You know what I miss most?" he said, his eyes on the window fogged with steam. "Someone remembering how I take my coffee. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet ways people can change each other's lives, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little warmth today, and subscribe to Kindness Loom for more stories like this one." The words hung in the air, fragile and honest. Mara paused mid-stride, the coffee pot warm in her hand. She looked over to where he sat, a thin, silver-haired man in a cardigan too large for his frame, his hands trembling as he unfolded a newspaper. He wasn't really reading it, she could tell. It was habit, not interest. Ritual, not distraction. Something about the way he said it, softly, as if embarrassed to miss something so small. Cracked through the wall she'd built over the years to survive the long shifts and the endless noise of other people's lives, she walked over and poured his coffee. "2 sugars, no cream," she said gently. "And you always fold the sports section first, even though you read the obituaries." For a moment, he just stared at her, his faded blue eyes filling with light that hadn't been there a second ago. "You notice," he whispered, almost as if the realization itself hurt. Mara smiled softly. "Everyone deserves to be noticed, Mr. Finch." That was 4 months ago. Since then, Walter Finch had become as much a part of the diner as the smell of pancakes or the hiss of the coffee machine. Every morning at exactly 7:15, he'd appear at the door, moving carefully, his shoes polished, his cardigan buttoned wrong in one place. He always ordered the same thing, toast, scrambled eggs, and coffee, but he left a $5 tip on an $8 bill. He didn't talk much at first, but over time, stories came out in bits and pieces. Mara learned that his wife, Dorothy, had passed 3 years earlier after a long illness. His only son lived in Seattle and rarely called. A grandson visited sometimes, but always in a hurry, always looking at his phone. "I don't blame him," Walter said once, staring into his coffee. "People have lives. I'm just in between chapters now, waiting for the epilogue." Mara reached out and touched his hand, her voice quiet but certain. "Maybe you're just starting a new chapter, Mr. Finch. Maybe it just hasn't been written yet." It became their small ritual. She would save his booth before the morning rush, keep his coffee warm, and make sure no one scattered his neatly folded newspaper. On his birthday, she brought him a slice of apple pie with one small candle. When she set it down in front of him, he looked at it for a long moment before tears filled his eyes. "You're the only one who remembered," he said, voice shaking. Mara blinked back tears of her own. "Everyone deserves to be remembered," she said softly, but she started to notice other things too. Walter's hands shook more each week. His voice grew quieter, his steps slower. Sometimes he'd repeat a story twice without realizing it. Sometimes he'd sit longer after finishing his meal, as if leaving meant returning to silence. And then one Tuesday he didn't show up. Mara tried to brush it off at first. Maybe he overslept. Maybe he had an appointment. But when he didn't come the next day, or the one after that, she felt something twist in her chest. She found his address in the phone book, a small, outdated habit that somehow felt right, and after her shift, she drove to his neighborhood. The house was small, neat, and achingly quiet. When Walter opened the door, he looked surprised, almost embarrassed. He was still in his pajamas, one pant leg tucked into a slipper. "I fell," he admitted softly. "Nothing broken, just tired. So tired, Mara. That night was the start of something she hadn't planned. She began stopping by after her shifts, bringing groceries, tidying the house, helping him sort his medications. Sometimes she'd read the newspaper aloud when his eyes were too weak to focus. Her manager wasn't happy about the shorter shifts or late arrivals, but Mara couldn't bring herself to care. Walter had no one else, and she knew, better than anyone, what loneliness could do to a person. He asked her once, while she tucked a blanket around his legs, "Why do you do all this? You don't owe me anything." She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because someone should. Because you matter. Because kindness isn't something we give when it's easy. It's something we give because we're human." 3 weeks later, Walter passed away quietly in his sleep. Mara got the call from the hospice nurse just after dawn. He had listed her as his emergency contact. She stood in the diner kitchen, unable to move, her apron still tied around her waist, and cried until her legs gave out. He had become family without either of them realizing it, and now that chapter had ended. The funeral was small. Mara, the nurse, and a few neighbors who'd barely known him. They gathered around a simple wooden coffin under a gray sky. Just as the service was ending, a man in a dark suit rushed in, phone still in hand. "I'm Marcus Finch," he said breathlessly. "Walter's grandson. Is this everyone?" Mara stared at him. "You're looking at everyone. We're all he had." Marcus's face flushed. "I was busy. I had work." Her voice broke as she replied, "He died alone, waiting for someone to remember he existed." Marcus didn't respond. He just turned and left, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the wind. 2 weeks later, he returned. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 lawyers followed him into the diner. Mara's stomach turned cold. She'd heard too many stories of people fighting over things that didn't matter until someone was gone. "Miss Brennan," one of the lawyers said, "we need to discuss Walter Finch's will." "I don't want anything," Mara said quickly. "I just wanted him to feel like he mattered." Marcus stepped closer, and for the first time, she saw something real in his eyes. Guilt, heavy and raw. "He left you the house," Marcus said quietly. "But that's not all. He left me a letter. The lawyer says I should read it with you here." They sat in Walter's old booth. The lawyer handed Marcus an envelope, yellowed and soft at the edges. Marcus's voice shook as he read aloud. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't blame you for being busy. Life has a way of rushing past, and I was just an old man sitting still. But I want you to know about Mara Brennan. She's a waitress who makes $8 an hour plus tips. She has nothing extra to give, and yet she gave me everything that mattered. Her time, her attention, her heart. She remembered my coffee. She remembered my birthday. She saw me when I had become invisible to everyone else, including you. I'm leaving her the house because she gave me something worth more than property. She gave me dignity in my final chapter. Learn from her, Marcus. Success means nothing if you're too busy to love people. Wealth means nothing if you can't remember how someone takes their coffee. Be better than I taught you to be. Be more like Mara." By the time Marcus finished, his face was wet with tears. "I was trying so hard to make him proud," he said, voice breaking. "But I forgot to just be with him." Mara reached across the table, her hand finding his. "He knew you loved him. He just needed to feel it more often." From that moment, something began to change. Marcus started showing up at the diner, not for legal reasons or guilt, but to listen. He learned the names of the regulars, remembered their orders, asked about their days. He cut back his hours at work, volunteered at the senior center Walter had once mentioned but never joined. And slowly, he and Mara built something together. Not a romance born out of loss, but a shared purpose shaped by love and memory. They turned Walter's old house into a community space for the lonely and forgotten. They called it Walter's Corner. Every morning, the place filled with laughter, stories, and the comforting smell of coffee. There were people who'd spent years in silence now finding connection again. On the wall near the entrance hung a framed photograph of Walter, smiling faintly at the camera, with a small plaque beneath it that read, "Everyone deserves to be remembered." A year later, on the day of the grand opening, Mara stood near the front door, surrounded by faces that once would have gone unseen. Marcus stood beside her, his hand brushing hers. "Do you think he knows?" he asked softly. "That he changed everything?" Mara smiled, her eyes glistening. "I think he always knew that one act of kindness could change everything. He just needed someone to prove it to him first." An elderly woman approached with a cup of coffee and asked gently, "How do you take yours, dear?" Mara's breath caught. "2 sugars, no cream." The woman smiled. "I'll remember that." If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Loom. It helps us keep telling stories that remind the world that small kindnesses still matter. And before you go, tell us in the comments below, who in your life remembers how you take your coffee? Because in the end, it isn't wealth or fame that keeps us alive in people's hearts. It's the quiet ways we make them feel seen, the simple acts of remembering, the gentle truth that kindness, once given, never really disappears. Somewhere, in a diner at sunrise, someone will smile at a stranger and say, "2 sugars, no cream." And in that moment, someone else's story will begin again.